place so fast that is almost overwhelming.
What do you think the situation is like right now?
Right now, I believe people are very happy. They're out in the streets, including my family. And by what I know about the Romanian people, they know how to party, so they're going to be very happy about eventually being free, because at this point in time, we don't know what the next government is going to be, and I don't believe anybody knows what the next government has in mind for the people. However, I don't think they're going to go through the same harsh treatment that they have been going through for the past 24 years.
Ms. Urban says that Ceausescu's regime was one of the most repressive behind the Iron Curtain. He is obviously happy that the former president has been captured and is hoping that the man is brought to trial.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim, for that report. And in Panama this morning, American troops are...
After hundreds, perhaps thousands, have been martyred in the cause of freedom. The violence has not stopped in Romania. Last night, the presidential palace was attacked and burned while cheering crowds pressed in close and celebrated Ceausescu's fall. But the security police of the ousted dictator are still fighting the national army and the people. And there is some confusion over what has happened to Ceausescu. Some news reports say he was arrested while trying to leave the country. Others say he's still hiding. Wherever he is no longer in power. Early this morning, senior military commanders used Romanian television. They declared the nation free and played music that had been banned. Then they called masses to the streets and reassured them that the Romanian military is on their side. The military declared the end of the dictator's reign. The announcements in Bucharest drew hundreds of thousands to the streets, while mourners gathered where the public upheaval began last weekend. In the western city of Timișoara, 2 massive graves were discovered. They held the bodies of 632 men, women, and children who were shot by security forces on Sunday. Tonight, tens of thousands of their fellow citizens mourned the loss and celebrated that the fearless protesters did not die in vain. At the National Palace, where just 2 days ago the dictator had tried to reassert his power before a jeering crowd, today a new transitional leader stood with the full power and support of the people. And Corneliu Ionescu is the first popular leader of the new Romania. What's happening in Romania is more than just a news story for those who have relatives or friends in that country. Channel 7's Carolyn Tyler reports on a peninsula family for whom the day's events have a very special meaning.
And this is the younger daughter. She's 15. So
they have relatives in Romania, and so it's been a long day for Michael and Doina Srbin. They've been on the phone since late last night and have recorded some of the conversations. This is their cousin Christine describing the carnage she's witnessing on the streets outside her Bucharest home.
Their windows overlook the plaza where everything took place. So it was described to me firsthand how the militiamen were shooting the people. People were kneeling and begging not to be shot. And lots of children. And she was very emotional, and she was screaming, "Help us, help us." So she took the phone by the window, and on the tape you could hear the shots and the people screaming.
That was shortly before 1 o'clock this morning, California time. Just 2 hours later, the tide had turned. Dictator Nicolae Ceausescu was out, and a call to another cousin captured those changes underway.
In a very emotional voice, he walked me for a couple of minutes through what was happening on the streets, people embracing the military, laying down the military laying down the arms. It was again a very emotional moment for all of us, and I couldn't help but saying bravo, bravo. By the end of the tape, he broke down and cried. He choked, and so did I.
The Serbans are now trying to organize the Bay Area Romanian community to send financial help as their homeland moves from repression to reform. In Belmont, Carolyn Tyler, Channel 7 News.
What remarkable change in such a short period of time. The tumultuous events in Romania are at once horrifying and in a way exhilarating. Almost impossible, however, to monitor. The map may give you an idea of some of the hot spots as we understand them tonight. First of all, the city of Bucharest, the great capital of Ceausescu's cult of personality, is where we have been watching the demonstrations of the last 36 hours. Bucharest is in the southeastern section of the country in the shadow of the great Carpathian Mountains here and the Transylvanian Alps here. The last country to break from its strict Marxist past. It is literally surrounded by enemies now. Indications are that the dictator and his family fled north to a city called, this city here, called Târgoviște, where Ceausescu was or was not captured. It is still unclear. Now, Nicu, Ceausescu's oldest son, was captured in this town, Sibiu, north of the mountains, where he was a provincial dictator. As for reports of fighting, unconfirmed reports of battles between security police loyal to Ceausescu and the army have, by the way, the army has sided with reformers, we want to make this clear, has occurred in Constanța on the Black Sea, here at Craiova on the Bulgarian border, and again in the area near Timișoara, where the series of demonstrations and the evidence of that terrible slaughter was found today. Now, 2 huge graves filled with men and women, at least 24 children, were found in Timișoara here on the Hungarian border. A quick reminder of where the storm has run its course in Eastern Europe, if it has somehow slipped your mind. It is a remarkable year. It began in Hungary, where thousands marched in early April. Hungary here on the border with Romania. And of course, they were demanding freedoms as early as April. It quickly moved to East Germany, where refugees began a one-way flood through Czechoslovakia and Hungary that escalated to a rapid-fire series of changes in government and, of course, the destruction of the wall. And finally, to the opening of the Brandenburg Gate this week. Free access in both directions for Christmas. In Poland, where the first great protest began in the early 80s, the communists finally gave up the ghost and solidarity found its place in the future. In Czechoslovakia, the slightest push seemed enough to end years of oppression there, and even old rebels from the Soviet invasion of 20 years ago came home. Even Bulgaria, here to the south of Romania, the Soviets' henchmen there in Eastern Europe caved to the new reform. And now, Romania itself, the most manic of the Stalinist regimes, the one no one thought would go, it seems on its way out. Just a couple more to mention. Yugoslavia has been a rebel among rebels for years and really doesn't count in this tumult because it really was on its way to this end 20 years ago. But tiny Albania, a medieval country with Stalinist leadership, remains utterly isolated and withdrawn. Albania seems alone in what was the old idea of the Eastern Bloc. A remarkable year. Anna?
It sure is, Peter. Those of us who live in democracies often take rights and freedoms for granted. And sometimes we find it difficult to imagine what it's like to live in constant fear. Today I met a Romanian woman who's been in the United States for only 2 years. She last spoke with her mother on Sunday after hearing reports of that terrible massacre in Timișoara.
At this hour, the country's flag. And they shouted tribute to those in their homeland who have unseated the tyrant Ceausescu. But with the celebration, there is also pain. Many of the Romanians in San Francisco had fled from Ceausescu oppression years ago and watched from afar as it got worse and worse.
I just came from there last month. I spent a couple of weeks. And I couldn't believe my eyes, what I saw. I mean, people were suffering. They were scared on the street. My former friends of more than 10 years, they were afraid of talking to me, even on the phone.
There was no one in this crowd who expected freedom in Romania to come so quickly or at such a price.
It's just incredible to have the Ceausescu regime toppled. It's beyond our wildest dreams. But so many people had to die for this. It's such a sad occasion. So we rejoice and we mourn at the same time.
A time that will someday be marked as one of the most important in Romanian history. Wilson Van Alst, News Center 4.
And in San Leandro tonight, prayers were offered for the Romanian people. They're pleased with the downfall of the Ceausescu government, but worried that the bloodshed isn't over.
They're still fighting on the streets, and they are very worried about it. We talk on the phone with the people, and they are scared and desperate, and they're crying and they're screaming. Let everybody know what's happening here.
The demonstrators say Romanians are starved for a more democratic way of life, but they realize that reforms can't begin until the forces still loyal to Ceausescu are defeated.
And what a day it has been in Berlin. In the East and the West, thousands joined in celebrating an event that will go down in history. For the first time in 28 years.
Where the fighting and the celebrating continue at once. Hundreds of thousands of Romanians filled Republic Square in Bucharest after the fall of President Nicolae Ceausescu's government Friday night. The celebrating went on for hours, despite sporadic gunfire from a handful of pro-Ceausescu forces. The presidential palace was in flames Friday night as most soldiers laid down their weapons and joined the dissidents. Army officers later appeared on television to apologize for the massacres of the past week, even as villagers in the town of Timișoara uncovered mass graves left from the demonstrations of the past week. Only yesterday, Ceausescu warned demonstrators that any uprising would be brutally crushed. Today, the demonstrators stood on the same balcony and tossed Ceausescu's private possessions into the street. There is still no definitive word on his whereabouts. Some reports say he may have been arrested in a northern province. There's little else.
While Ceausescu appears to have been routed and his army converted, his secret police are apparently continuing to fight. ABC's John Donovan, who is in Bucharest, tells us those forces are small but deadly.
The security forces appear to have several advantages.
Stark shows us.
There were tears and cheers as Romanians tonight both marveled and worried about the rush of events in their homeland. About 150 gathered on the steps of City Hall for a candlelight vigil.
We expect this day, and we are waiting for a long time to happen something like that in Romania. It was too much for our people.
This man left Romania just last Friday as the demonstrations began. He already had his passport and ticket in hand, was one of the last to fly out of the country.
State television focused on joyful scenes in the town of Timișoara, where last weekend's massacre of demonstrators started it all. Romanian television unflinchingly showed the grim results, victims unearthed from the mass graves. Ceausescu loyalists are also being blamed for continued fighting tonight in Bucharest and other cities. Romanian television showed the presidential palace in flames. Television also showed his captured son standing impassively in front of cameras.
You can see who is in the studio. It's the Crown Prince, Nicu Ceausescu, who at the recent Congress applauded his mom and dad without any shame.
The images we are seeing here seem familiar. Yet another country cutting the communist symbol out of the center of its flag. But Romania is not just another East Bloc domino falling to democracy.
I don't think you can compare Romania to any of the other Eastern European countries. Countries like Poland, like East Germany, like Czechoslovakia, like Hungary. All those countries, even though they had some repressive leadership, had opponents, had people who were dissidents in those countries and who spoke out against the regimes. Some of them were arrested and put in jail, but their voices were heard.
In Romania, this is not the case. In Romania, you don't really have a society. You just have people who have been atomized, who've been repressed for years, and there's been nothing like an opposition being allowed to develop because of the very effective repression that Ceausescu has exercised.
Ceausescu, the most repressive Stalinist in the East Bloc, used to be called a maverick. In 1968, he condemned the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. Finally tonight, another first for Romanian television. The announcement that many thought would never be heard. An announcement that free elections would be held in April. This is Jim Hickey for Nightline.
Joining us now live from Bucharest, Romania, via telephone is ABC News correspondent John Donovan. I should tell you, he cannot hear me. We will be able to hear him, and we've just asked him to give us the very latest on the situation there tonight.
The Romanian people had no say in all this. They have suffered silently as Ceausescu squeezed them until there are now gas lines in this oil-producing country and food lines in this rich land. To add to the misery, Ceausescu has launched a plan to erase half the nation's villages and replace them with so-called agro-industrial complexes. It's a bizarre scheme to turn farmers into workers and abolish the differences between town and country. In this village, private homes are already slated for demolition. This house belongs to an old woman who says, "It will kill me if my house is destroyed. How can I move? Ceausescu is crazy." Joanna and Stefan Jardash live across the road. Their house and garden are all they have. They say that if the order comes to move, like it or not, we'll have to go. This is the future that Ceausescu is preparing. Jerry-built apartment buildings, slums before they're even inhabited. It's no wonder that some of the people uprooted from their villages are not happy to live in them. Denied a real vote, Romanians are voting with their feet. In the past 2 years, tens of thousands have risked their lives to flee across the heavily guarded borders. Most of the refugees come from the Hungarian minority of 2 million in Romania, where their religion and folklore are forbidden. So they flee to Hungary and live in cramped refugee centers. This family managed to scurry across the border this morning. Free now, but afraid to speak for fear that those they left behind will be persecuted. It blocks absolute dictators. Tom Fenton, CBS News, Bucharest.
We in Hungary are so much desperate about the events in Romania and mainly in Pennsylvania, where the largest minority in Europe, the 2 million Hungarians, live. A gentleman whose brother is a doctor in Pennsylvania has got to know by telephone that what's going on in Timișoara is a real par excellence bloodshed. The military is described as acting as brutal as animals, killing pregnant women on the streets. The demonstrations in Romania, in Pennsylvania, has broken out to protest against the Ceausescu family dictatorship, which can only be compared to that of the Nazis of the 30s or with that of Pol Pot in Cambodia in the late 70s. Peter Zentai, Hungarian Radio for the CNN World Report.
The leaders of 6 out of Romania say government troops have shot and killed hundreds of anti-government protesters in the city of Timișoara.
Still ahead on Newsday, a look at the link between earthquakes in San Francisco.
Were killed in the clashes, and there are reports the violence continued today. Washington is consulting with its allies for some kind of coordinated response to the matter. The State Department says economic and scientific ties to Romania are under review. Romania's hardline government has rejected the political and economic reforms sweeping Eastern Europe.
All this as reports continue that Ceausescu has ordered a bloody as necessary crackdown on any sign of Romanian dissent. Here is CNN's Mark Leff.
Romania's official news media are saying nothing directly about any trouble in the country now, though the Communist Party newspaper is warning that authorities won't tolerate any challenges. But non-Romanians leaving the western city of Timișoara, where demonstrators and the army clashed over the weekend, tell reporters of seeing many people shot and many people killed.
Among them one old woman which was run over by the tank, and the child whose legs were cut by machine gun.
The reports of Romania's crackdown on anti-government protests are drawing almost universal condemnation of the Ceausescu government's policies, even in neighboring Bulgaria, which until recently was almost as hardline Stalinist as Romania.
We the Bulgarian people are with the Romanian people.
So is the Polish parliament, which denounced human rights abuses in Romania, as did the foreign ministers of the European community. It is virtually impossible for people to get into Romania now. Border guards have stopped trains full of Christmas-time visitors and sent them back across the frontier. And road crossing points are now sealed to all but essential traffic. The Romanian government's excuse for keeping Soviet tourists out is bad weather. As the Soviet foreign minister began an unprecedented visit to NATO headquarters in Belgium, Soviet news media were carrying second-hand reports of trouble in Romania.
These report a scene out of Tiananmen Square. They say that troops opened fire without warning over the weekend, gunning down hundreds of anti-government demonstrators.
Witnesses say women and children were among the victims. Unlike the rest of Eastern Europe, Romania has so far refused to waver from its strict Stalinist-era policies. In East Europe...
Tom, Romania has virtually sealed itself off from the outside world tonight. Eyewitnesses leaving Romania say there were demonstrations, the government sent in the tanks, and soldiers fired. How many are dead is anyone's guess.
On the Yugoslavian border, students leaving Romania said they were in the western city of Timișoara on Sunday evening, and they saw a massacre.
100 deaf people there, and mainly children, the students. The last few days I've seen soldiers with guns, tanks, the guns, he's shouting all the night. 3 nights now.
Looking across the river from Bulgaria to Romania, soldiers prowl the riverbank. Something serious has happened in one of the last of the Stalinist states, but the stories are coming out piecemeal. A truck driver came through when the trouble started.
The massacre in Transylvania, and that turned the tide.
Once things began to move in Transylvania, I became less surprised. It became apparent that people had lost their fear and that this regime was finished.
And some experts say the bloodletting is not over yet.
I think it'll be a very bloody couple of days, if not weeks. I'm afraid we won't see the kind of soft landing that we've seen in East Germany and Czechoslovakia and the rest of Eastern Europe. This was a very brutal regime. There are lots of bad feelings, lots of scores to be settled, lots of bad people with guns still. So I'm afraid there'll be a period of great turmoil, but then after that, the army, I think, will be able to establish authority.
The State Department confirms that a group called the National Salvation Front is claiming to be in control. Its leader is Corneliu Manescu, a 73-year-old in poor health who's been an army general, foreign minister, and president of the United Nations General Assembly. Experts here agree he won't be able to maintain power for long.
Unlike some of the other East European countries, you haven't had an organized opposition. You haven't had 10 years to prepare, as you had in both Poland and in Hungary. So they're going to have to sort things out pretty quickly, and putting somebody in charge like this is a way of buying time.
Manescu broke with Ceausescu back in March when he, along with 5 other communist leaders, signed a petition.
Decades with Romania in Ceausescu's iron grip. With more on today's stunning events, here's David Rose.
Freedom, freedom, freedom. The vast crowd in the center of Bucharest chanted less than 2 hours ago, in the most extraordinary pictures transmitted live from Romania. I came out of prison an hour ago. This man, Dumitru Mazil, told the crowd. He was speaking on the balcony of all places, the Communist Party's Central Committee building. Mazil, who's emerging as one of the new Romania's leaders, appealed for silence for all those who died in the uprising, and the huge, excited crowd became completely silent.
Pentru morții noștri.
As the crowd waved a Romanian flag with the communist symbol ripped from the center, a speaker on the platform told them Ceausescu and his hated wife Elena had been caught. We've got both of them, his family, the whole gang, the speaker said.
O să facem publică, va fi arestat, supus judecății publice.
When that's confirmed, we will announce it and he'll be tried in public. Although the whole tone of this meeting was triumphant, it's clear that the leaders on the platform weren't confident they were in control. They repeatedly appealed to the crowd to stay in the square. A general announced that the security police had been placed under the army's control. One speaker announced shooting had started again and appealed for blood donors. Just how heavy the fighting in Bucharest has been overnight is clear from these pictures. Because of the chaos, it's not clear how many people died in the heavy fighting which went on all night. The security forces loyal to Ceausescu fought to hold the capital. Much of a day's action has taken place in and around Bucharest's main television station, ruthlessly used by Ceausescu for 24 years. As Eastern Bloc news agencies this morning reported the dictator had fled and Romania was free, another massive happy crowd gathered outside to celebrate. But inside the studio late this afternoon, there was a worrying indication that the anti-Ceausescu revolution was far from secure. This general appealed to the army to obey its officers and not to shoot the people. This huge meeting in the center of Bucharest is still continuing, with promises of free elections and repeated appeals to the people to stay united, calm, and not to take reprisals.
In the western city of Timișoara, tens of thousands of people took to the streets earlier today when they heard of Ceausescu's downfall. The ouster of Ceausescu was especially sweet for the people of Timișoara. That's where hundreds, perhaps thousands of demonstrators were killed Sunday in a crackdown on pro-democracy demonstrators. And just a short while ago, CNN received the first pictures which confirmed the extent of the weekend bloodshed. They show mutilated and tortured bodies, including those of children, which were pulled from mass graves that were found in Timișoara earlier today. We feel the pictures are perhaps too graphic to show you. Staunch Stalinism.
These are some of the images of the new Romania. Blue uniformed members of the dreaded security police defecting to the side of the army. Christmas trees decorated and displayed openly after more than 2 decades of celebration in secret. Another free newspaper springing up in a provincial town. Another Ceausescu family member, mathematician Zoya, in custody, but still no sign of her father. And another outbreak of fighting. Scattered clashes continue in Bucharest. Saturday night and again Sunday, defenders of the main TV station that serves as provisional government headquarters battled attacking holdouts from the old regime.
We haven't sufficient guns and the men who must soldier. We haven't enough soldiers.
Army troops inside surrounded an elevator after a rumor that security forces had breached the walls. The occupant turned out to be one of their own. The army placed a ring of armor around the building that remains a prime source of inspiration and a prime target.
Revolutie a învins.
In the studio, members of the Democratic Front called for a nationwide ceasefire. Soldiers outside reloaded and said they'd stay as long as they're needed. In the center of Bucharest, soldiers had to protect a Securitate defector from an angry crowd. There is plenty of anger mixed with joy throughout Romania. In Sibiu, the town young Nicu Ceausescu controlled before his arrest. In Cluj, another provincial town where people say thousands died in recent days.
A children was said, "Come on, Nanny, let's run." And a moment, ow, what's happened?
The revolution, he was never out of mind.
We'd like to show you now how 2 suspects were rounded up today in Bucharest.
Îi pușcăm în piața Victoriei! Nu, lăsați! Nu! Împușcați! Dumnezeu, mati! N-ai voie să trai! Împușcați! Dumnezeu, mati! N-ai voie să trai! Adu-l aici! Adu-l aici! Ăsta e! Adu-l aici! Ține-l să nu scape! Ține-l bine să nu scape! Să nu scăpăm! Țineți-l bine să nu scăpăm!
He declared today that Romania is no longer a communist country, but a free land. He vowed that Romania will become a real democracy. Meanwhile, remnants of the brutal regime of executed President Nicolae Ceausescu were out of sight but not out of mind. NBC's Arthur Kent is in Romania.
On the
Executed President Nicolae Ceausescu were out of sight but not out of mind. NBC's Arthur Kent is in Romania.
On the surface, calm, but in the surface, calm, but in the tunnels beneath central Bucharest. Calm, but in the tunnels beneath central Bucharest, a manhunt. Civilians. Bucharest, a manhunt. Civilians and the Romanian army search out the gunmen of the Securitate. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of the Ceausescu loyalists are hiding in these passageways. One group had left this dinner table minutes before searchers arrived. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of the Ceausescu loyalists are hiding in these passageways. One group had left this dinner table minutes before searchers arrived. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of the Ceausescu loyalists are hiding in these passageways. One group had left this dinner table minutes before searchers arrived. Then a suspect appears. Is interrogated. Romania's provisional government says Ceausescu's fighters must give up by tomorrow or face summary justice, presumably a firing squad. This suspect was lucky. The searchers believed his story that he was one of them. The provisional government introduced its new foreign affairs officials today and scrapped several of Ceausescu's laws. The blanket ban on abortion was repealed, as was the rule that Romanians have to call one another comrade. And it's not a crime now to criticize the government. Rebuilding this government will take months, if not years. Here at the Foreign Ministry, for instance, only one key member of the department remains. All other senior staff from the Ceausescu era have had to go.
More meat in this refrigerator than most Romanians see in a year. There's no reason for civilians to be here. The first thing they look for is a cyanide capsule sewn into the collar of the jacket. Nothing this time, but the different sorts of ID papers pointed to this man being one of Ceausescu's policemen. Perhaps a deserter, who knows? Although the fresh fruit may well have been intended for the... every corner. It's a very tense place to be, although this time there was no doubting the danger behind those steel doors at the top of the stairs, and we had to get out fast. You know who they were? Place to be, although this
still under a death sentence in Romania and asked to be videotaped in shadow. Securitate claims, says Pacepa, the ability to monitor 1 million phones and concealed microphones.
To learn, if you want, how they make love, to know everything. As Ceausescu used to say, that was my opinion poll.
So, here it is, Securitate's main listening center in Bucharest, the principal monitoring location for the Romanian secret police. It is, to put it gently, something of a letdown. Rather like the scene in The Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy pulls back the curtain to reveal not the all-knowing, all-powerful wizard, but a rather frightened little man who has inspired fear and trembling with smoke and mirrors. Not that telephones weren't bugged in Romania. Thousands were, perhaps even tens of thousands. And the fear that Nicolae Ceausescu inspired was all too real. Romania is an example of mass paranoia, and it was deliberately induced. I asked a group of Romanians if they knew of anyone who'd been arrested or disappeared.
Yes. We read about it in the newspapers, and we saw it on television, that people were missing.
We have here maybe 30, 40, 50 people around me. Has anyone here had the personal experience of a neighbor, a friend, a family member disappearing or being arrested by Securitate?
No.
Not one? It happened, of course. People were arrested, tortured, exiled, or simply disappeared. But much of it was deliberate distortion, disinformation. While the state media portrayed Ceausescu as a demigod worshipped by his people, the secret police prepared for the day when the Romanian people would rise against him. It was the ultimate irony. The people were terrified of Ceausescu, and he was pathologically afraid of them.
A standing ovation for 88,000. Right.
On December 18th, armored personnel carriers swept into a square in front of Timișoara's cathedral, where a group of children was holding a candlelight vigil. News that the children had been massacred spread by word of mouth and was also reported on Radio Free Europe. But this home video shows the cathedral steps just after the shooting. The steps are empty. The children have fled, and witnesses now confirm that there was no mass killing at the cathedral. The story of the massacre, however, added to exaggerated casualty reports from the previous day, sweeps the country.
Fired. One mob stormed and temporarily occupied the state TV station, the makeshift headquarters of December's uprising. When the station went back on the air, the manager declared those weren't mere protesters, but barbarians. Crowds overturned a police van and set it ablaze, and then laid siege to police headquarters. In scenes that showed, despite last month's elections, Romania is still a long way from peaceful democratic stability. Protesters had been predicting that the new National Salvation Front government, including many ex-communists, would show its true colors and would crush the demonstration that has occupied University Square in the center of Bucharest since April 22nd. And the running clashes reflected their promise not to give in. The crackdown started before dawn. Hundreds of police moved in, rounded up demonstrators, and loaded them into police vans. The new regime, elected in a landslide, was not without public sympathy in taking action, and could claim it would have happened sooner in many democratic Western capitals. The interim government bent the rules and let the protesters stay on through the election. But leaders of the front didn't improve their reputation for authoritarianism by calling them Golani, Romanian for bums. The Golani vowed to stay in this communist-free zone until all communists and ex-communists were barred from the government. And after the voting, widely criticized by foreign observers, they claimed Romania needs another revolution. A revolution it's not likely to get.
They're politically deeply confused. They don't really know what politics is about, not in the way that we understand it in the West. But if the National Salvation Front doesn't deliver what, in effect, it's promising to deliver, the outcome may be a revolution, but that won't happen for some time. I mean, minimum of a couple of years.
Protest leaders could gather only 25 to 30,000 at their biggest rallies, but their strength is not in numbers. The new government desperately needs foreign trade and foreign aid, and to get that, it must maintain at least an image of tolerance and democracy. Richard Blystone, CNN London.
The biggest protest rally ever held in the capital of Yugoslavia was staged today by anti-communist demonstrators.
5 people were killed before things seemed to quieten down at least a bit tonight. Betsy Aaron covered the day's events in Bucharest.
It was almost too good to be true, the Bucharest. But then, for some unknown reason, they changed their minds with a vengeance. The herd moved towards University Square. For a second day, miners were out for blood. Show me your identification. Who are you, they say. Her friend tries to help. He says, let her alone, she's sick. The street from the American. Show me your identification. Who are you, they say. Her friend tries to help. He says, let her alone, she's sick. An incident right across the street from the